Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're tackling one of the internet's absolute favorite mysteries, the Mandela Effect. But more importantly, we're going to unpack the completely shocking science behind human memory. We're going to look at exactly why massive groups of people vividly recall things that, well, literally never happened, and what that actually tells us about how our brains are wired.
Let's test your own memory right off the bat with a famous debate straight from Reddit. Which of these movie titles looks correct to you? Now, if you're absolutely certain it's Interview with a Vampire, I promise you are not alone. There are massive, sprawling threads of people who vividly remember it that way, complete with distinct memories of the movie posters and the book covers. But the actual title, historically, is Interview with the Vampire.
So let's get into Section 1, Glitches in the Matrix, the Internet's favorite mystery.
So how does a collective misremembering, like the title of Anne Rice's famous vampire novel, occur on such a massive global scale? Well, if you browse the discussions online, you'll see that folks are largely split into two camps. On one side, you have people who honestly believe we've shifted into parallel timelines, like the universe itself literally changed around us. On the other side, you have those who recognize this as a fascinating collective cognitive glitch, a psychological false memory.
And honestly, the scale of this phenomenon is staggering. Millions of people misremember the spelling of the famous children's book as the Berenstein Bears, with an E. Or take the 1990s genie movie called Shazam, starring the comedian Sinbad. Entire generations of people vividly remember watching it on VHS, yet it never existed. There was a movie called Kazam starring Shaquille O'Neal, sure, but no Shazam. From Mr. Monopoly's non-existent monocle to Darth Vader's actual dialogue, our shared cultural memory is just riddled with these completely fabricated details.
Now, to put this into perspective, these false memories aren't just limited to fun pop culture trivia. In a 2010 study looking at the Bologna-Centrale railway station in Italy, an astounding 92% of people shared the exact same false memory. See, the station's clock was damaged in a 1980 bombing, repaired, and then much later, in 1996, it was permanently stopped as a memorial. Yet 92% of the people surveyed falsely remembered the clock as having been stopped ever since the original bombing.
For a lot of people, finding out their memory is just flat out wrong is deeply unsettling. Take this Reddit user who is entirely convinced that multiple timelines are a real thing simply because of their own conflicting memories. This whole paranormal theory was actually coined by a researcher named Fiona Broom. She vividly, yet completely falsely, remembered South African leader Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s. That's actually where the term Mandela Effect comes from. He died in 2013, but she found hundreds of others who inexplicably shared her exact fabricated memory.
Which brings us to Section 2, The Science of Suggestion, featuring Elizabeth Loftus and the car crash.
So instead of jumping to alternate universes, let's look at the peer-reviewed cognitive science. To really grasp what's happening here, we have to look at psychological pioneers like Elizabeth Loftus, who showed us just how fragile human memory truly is. Back in 1974, Loftus and her colleague John Palmer designed this brilliant experiment. They had participants watch videos of a car accident. Afterwards, they asked the viewers to estimate how fast the cars were going. But here is the trick. They intentionally varied the phrasing of the question for different groups.
By simply swapping a single word, the researchers literally manipulated the participants' memories. Using the intense word smashed instead of the much milder word hit caused people to remember the cars traveling at significantly higher speeds. Even wilder, the group that heard the word smashed was much more likely to invent memories of seeing broken glass in the video, even though there was absolutely zero broken glass in the original footage.
This experiment perfectly defines what psychologists call the misinformation effect. It proves that suggestive language, presuppositions, or even fake news can literally construct new, false memories in our minds well after an event has happened. Basically, your memory isn't a locked video recording. It's an editable document, and anyone can hit Save As.
All right, Section 3, How Brains Hack Memories, Trading Accuracy for Efficiency.
So, you might be wondering, how do our brains actually store these flawed files in the first place? Well, in the 1990s, researchers proposed the fuzzy trace theory. This theory explains that our brains don't just store one single master copy of a memory. Instead, we trade perfect accuracy for general themes by storing information in two parallel but totally distinct ways: verbatim traces and gist traces. And it's this exact system that makes our memories so vulnerable to manipulation.
This dual storage system is the main culprit behind the Mandela effect. Verbatim traces are the exact literal details. Gist traces are the fuzzy general meanings, the vibe basically. Over time, those verbatim memories fade super quickly and we're left relying almost entirely on the gist. So we might lose the verbatim spelling of the children's book Berenstain, but we keep the gist that it sounds like a typical name ending in Stein, right? Like Frankenstein or Einstein. Our brain just naturally fills in the gap.
In fact, scientists can intentionally trigger these false gist memories on demand, using what's called the DRM paradigm. Try this out. If you give someone a list of words like flow, current, stream, and bend, and then ask them to recall the list later, they will almost always falsely remember the word river being on that list. The brain recognizes the gist of the words and automatically fills in the blanks with related but entirely fabricated information.
Let's move to Section 4, Real-World Consequences. This is when fake memories go too far.
Look, misremembering Darth Vader's dialogue was totally harmless. But when you apply this to the justice or medical systems, false memories have real, devastating victims. Back in the 1980s and 90s, there was this controversial wave of recovered memory therapy. Therapists used extreme techniques like hypnosis and guided imagery, which tragically led to completely false accusations of abuse that shattered families. Holly Ramona's therapist was actually sued for negligence after implanting false memories using drugs. And in the criminal justice system, cases like Joseph Paisley's highlight how the intense stress of a crime can completely alter an eyewitness's memory, leading to potential false convictions.
One of the main ways these false memories were inadvertently created was through what researchers call the lost in the mall technique. Through repeated persistent suggestions, therapists and researchers found they could literally convince people they had experienced highly emotional events that never actually occurred, like being lost in a crowded shopping mall as a young child. It proves our past is frighteningly malleable to outside suggestion. Now add in everyday natural risk factors, and the problem just multiplies. Things like severe sleep deprivation when an event is happening, having a highly creative imagination, or simply facing immense social pressure from an authority figure, like a really aggressive interviewer or a trusted therapist. All of these factors cause our mental source monitoring systems to break down, which makes us completely unable to tell the difference between a real memory and something we just imagined.
And finally, Section 5, Why Flawed Memories Matter, the Evolutionary Trade-off. So, if false memories can be so incredibly destructive, why on earth did humans evolve to have such easily hacked memories in the first place? Well, it turns out false memories are just a byproduct of highly adaptive memory systems. Relying on that gist memory helps us make rapid, safe choices for survival rather than getting hopelessly bogged down trying to remember exact verbatim details. By abstracting the world around us, we can apply prior knowledge to future problem solving. A brain that operates on gist is actually demonstrating superior organizational processes and heightened creativity. It's a massive evolutionary trade-off for efficiency. But as one skeptical Redditor perfectly noted here, the evidence of cognitive science is overwhelming, yet so many people refuse to accept it. For many of us, it is much, much easier to believe that the entire universe shifted timelines than to humbly accept that our own brain is just playing tricks on us. We trust our own consciousness so implicitly that questioning it feels like a literal attack on our very identity.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to take away from this explainer. If millions of us can vividly remember a genie movie that was never actually made, or confidently recall a historical timeline that simply doesn't exist, how much of your own cherished past is just a story your brain invented? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and I highly encourage you to keep questioning what you think you know.